So again, we always go back to these three pillars when someone is experiencing chronic illness or when they want to optimize themselves. Number one, are you too toxic? Number two, are you missing anything that the body needs to heal? And three, is your vitality high enough to overcome disease and to have the vitality to really have vibrant health? So again, month one is really centered around this topic. Are you too toxic? And we're going to talk about the external toxins that you are potentially putting into your body, whether you know it or not, and also the internal environment as well. So our body. So this is one of our mentor. This is her father who taught her. She's currently out in Spokane at Windrose Naturopathic Clinic, and she's the one that taught us. She learned from her dad, and her practice has been around for over 70 years, and it's the oldest naturopathic practice in the country. So her dad was the one that really made the food intolerance evaluation popular, and our practice is set up in a very similar fashion to his. And the whole goal of his entire practice was to heal the hole in the middle. What does that mean? That means if we don't heal our GI tract and we aren't excreting toxins through our GI tract effectively, then no matter what you do in terms of health, you aren't going to be moving in the right direction. So that's why we always start in month one with the food intolerance evaluation, because then you're inherently decreasing the amount of toxins you're being exposed to. We talk about ways for you to decrease your overall exposure. And again, that's going to be the main topics of today. But if you think about it like this, the way that Dr. Harold Dick did, is that everything he did was centered around healing the gut. Not only did he make sure that patients were able to excrete properly through their GI tract, through stool, also he made sure the GI tract was healed so that they can absorb all of the foods that we need to thrive. So every day our cells produce waste. Every cell is basically, if you think about every cell, it's basically a metabolic machine house where you're constantly, it's taking in things and then it's utilizing those things for the functions of the cell, and then it's excreting the toxins throughout. It's excreting the toxins from the cell, and then those toxins are being excreted throughout the body through these different organs of excretion. So these are the main organs of excretion that excrete the metabolic waste that we're exposed to every single day. So it's, our bodies were created and they were made with these organs of excretion so that they could excrete toxins, like through your kidneys, which is obviously then they excrete toxins through urination, through your skin, through perspiration, through your lungs, through breathing in carbon dioxide, your intestines, obviously through stool as well. So these are the main organs of excretion. And even before we had the environmental toxins that we have today, our bodies were created to excrete the normal metabolic waste that we have every single day. What's happened with the world that we're in today is because of all of the drastic change that we've had to urbanize our culture, is that that's produced an enormous amount of environmental toxins. So only are our cells trying to deal with the normal metabolic waste that they produce every single day to live, then also they have to deal with this burden of environmental toxins that we'll talk about next. So we're exposed to toxins every single day, as I've said now a few times, in the environment. Basically, if you think about it, before, I would say roughly 1900, the majority of individuals lived in a rural area. Today, depending on what statistics you see, it's 60-40, 70-30 of individuals that live in an urban area. And again, the numbers can change depending on what you describe as urban. But through that process, there's been a huge rush through technology as well to produce things that are faster, to produce cars, right, for example, and all these types of things that make our lives the convenience of what we have today. Whether it's in the environment or whether it's in your body, everything that we do, there's there's an equal and opposite reaction. And that's not good or bad. It's just there to be aware of. So when we are creating these conveniences for us to have in terms of driving our car, in terms of having the homes that we do, so on and so forth, then we have to get that energy from somewhere. And with that being said, the majority of those processes come through factories and things of that nature. So in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, there was a huge rush of this type of change that was happening in our culture. And there were many toxins that were released into the environment. The EPA and the FDA, depending on what exactly you're talking about, have basically created acts to limit the amount of exposure that we're exposed to both through the environment and through toxins through the air. These acts are there to help protect us to a certain degree, to make sure that we aren't exposed to so many toxins that everybody gets sick. However, if you're experiencing chronic illness, the limits or the threshold of what these different organizations and the government say, you may still be exposed to too many of them, depending on your constitution or depending on your environment. So being aware of that is that these are in place to help protect us, but I don't believe in many of the thresholds that they've put here to be safe or healthy at all. So it's my opinion that many of the toxins that they allow in the environment, for example, sometimes when they're in the body, you'll never be able to break down those toxins ever. Sometimes when they're in the environment, it takes tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of years to break down some of these toxins. So imagine if that's exposed to your body, imagine what that does. So there's things in place that are here to protect us, but it doesn't mean that those things are, in my opinion, what I consider to be healthy. That's the overarching theme. So we're basically going to talk about air, food, and water, and the toxins that we're exposed to. We're going to give you a few examples of things you can do into your life today to decrease the exposure, and to also, in the same token, to be aware of these things so that we can make the necessary changes to heal from chronic illness and optimize our bodies. So the 6 primary air pollutants in the US, these are all the things that are monitored by the EPA, depending on what exactly you're talking about. Again, because there's different agencies within the government, certain agencies monitor other things. So when I say those type of statements, I'm speaking with a broad brush, and I'm sure if you got into the nitty gritty, there's smaller organizations that monitor some of these things, but that's the overarching theme. We see with the primary air pollutants, we see that these are caused by, as I've talked about already, the industrial processes that have taken place over the past 120 plus years. And whether it's transportation, whether it's the fuel burning and the industrial process, or construction ag, or really all this is construction or ag, this is basically processes that are in place to give our lives the convenience that we have. And again, with anything that happens, whether it's in the environment or in our bodies, there's always a consequence to actions that we do. And with that being said, the most important and the most sensitive thing that I think you should be aware of with the primary air pollutants is the particulate matter. The particulate matter is what you see if you've ever looked at the weather app on your phone when you're in a certain place and says the air quality at this time is not to the highest degree. That's because there's a high number of particulate matter that's in the air that can cause severe distress depending on if you have any COPD or any sort of lung issues like that. So we're going to be exposed to these toxins no matter what, especially if you're in a very urban area like I am here in Chicago. There's no way to get around that. So what we recommend is to be aware of your exposure to them, but more importantly, keep your house and specifically your bedroom, keep the air in that environment as clean as possible. What does this mean? It means to dust, it means to vacuum, it means to do good cleaning practices to make sure that at least the exposure in your home is clean. It means to take off your shoes every single time you get inside. You should never be walking around with your shoes on inside. It means to buy plants and have plants on the indoors so that our plants can naturally take care of the air. It means to be aware of the air filters and change them in your air conditioning and heating. It also means to buy filters you can buy and have in your room, specifically your bedroom. When we're asleep, if you think about how many hours there are in the day and how many hours we sleep, It's highly important to be aware of all of the things that are in your room, and specifically the air quality in your room as you're breathing that in when you're asleep. All of those tips that I just gave you are great ideas to be aware of the air that's in your home, because the pollutants that are in the air, that are in our outside world, especially when we're in an urban area, it's almost impossible to avoid. And the whole goal of this is not about to be perfect. The goal is to be aware and decrease our exposure in all of our environmental toxins, and not to intoxicate ourselves with our food intolerance and other things of that nature that we're putting into our body, so that our cells can have the capacity to do what they're supposed to do. When our cells are burned with all of these toxins and we're consistently intoxicating ourselves by eating our intolerance and eating processed foods and alcohol and so on and so forth, our cells don't have the capacity to do their function and to do their job. So water. So I'm a big advocate of drinking clean water, as anybody in the natural healing arts is. It's unbelievable the amount of things that can be added into your water supply that they say is fine, that, in my opinion, is not. Again, the threshold and the things that each city allows into their water depends on the city, and just because they allow it doesn't mean it's healthy. From the EWG, which I'll be talking about them a lot because the majority of these slides and statistics are coming from their website. Again, ewg.org is an amazing group of individuals that test home products. They test different air quality, so on and so forth. And you can find all of their information again at ewg.org. It stands for the Environmental Working Group. Here are some studies that they did independently. They found that 306 contaminants are found in our nation's tap water. More than half have no safety standards, meaning that there are things that are tested, that are checked consistently with your city or wherever you live, whoever's taking care of your water that you're getting out of your tap. But it doesn't mean that there's other things, or I guess what it does not mean is that there's other things in there that don't have a safety standard. This is from runoff from agriculture. This is from construction, so on and so forth. So things are in your water supply that aren't even being tested. This is why it's of the utmost importance that you get a water filter for your water, for your house, either a whole house water supply, or we recommend, depending on your intolerance, a reverse osmosis that fits into your fridge, or a Berkey water filter that sits on your counter. We also recommend, if you aren't going to do a whole house water filter, to change your shower to a chlorine filter as well. As an overall theme, your body absorbs, depending on the studies you assess, 7 to 8 times more toxins through your shower than it does through drinking the water. Right? Everything that's directly absorbed, put on your skin, directly goes into your bloodstream. At least when you're consuming it via your GI tract, there's some filtration processes already in place to help protect the body. Okay, so back to the chemicals and the toxins that are in water. So last year I used an independent lab to test the tap water that was coming out of our tap in Chicago. I won't pull that up here, but surprise, surprise, there were many toxins that were over the EPA limit, specifically from the halogen group and all of the bromides that are commonly found in cosmetic products. They get broken down and then can never be, as I said before, many of these products can never be fully taken care of because they are such a strong molecule or strong chemical. With that being said, when you filter your water, make sure you're getting a proper filtration system, as I already described the ones that I recommend before. We also want to make sure that we're getting some sort of fluoride water filter as well. This is a whole topic in and of itself, but I'm very passionate about water, so I'll give you a quick little cap here. Different halogens, meaning different molecules that have a specific type of electron on their outer shell, they basically attach to the iodine receptor in your thyroid. If you have any sort of energy issue, any sort of metabolic issue, anything of that nature that would lend itself to a thyroid, the first thing you have to do is decrease your exposure to all of these halogens. That means chlorine, that means fluoride, and all these different things they put into the water. If you do want the information about the lab that I used, I'm more than happy to share it with you. It's really easy. You basically they send you a kit, you fill up specific vials that have reactions, and you send them back to the lab. It takes about 6 to 8 weeks to get back. It's a relatively easy process, and then you'll be informed about what pollutants are in your tap water. And with that being said, you can take that information to the city or to the county, depending on who's watching your water. And I always check the city of Chicago's water, which they post once a quarter about their um, the threshold of toxins that are allowed into the water, and they post all those results about once a quarter. And it's very interesting. Again, I'm not saying anything here, but just take it with a grain of salt here. Is that they always end up, most of the toxins end up at the top of the threshold, meaning let's say the range of blank is 0.09 to 0.15. Somehow every toxin ends up at the very top of the threshold, but never over at 0.15. Seems to me that they could be fudging the results, because what lab evaluation do you do to test the environment that ends up at the top of the threshold, but never over every single time? Yeah, I don't know either. So water filtration is a very proper thing. And we haven't even talked about structured water yet, which is a whole entity in of itself. First thing you have to do is make sure you're drinking clean water. And then we'll talk about different avenues throughout the program to drink structured water. There's basically a fourth phase of water that allows your body to naturally use the energy of water to help heal. And that comes through the structuring of water, which naturally happens when water is out in rivers and was in all of these glacier type environments where it's naturally draining, and the way that it's structured allows for it to be used very healing properties to be used very easily by the body. So the first step is to get a water filter for your home, because there's so many toxins that aren't even tested that are in your water supply. The second is to think about how we're going to structure our water. We'll talk about that next. But these are some common things that are in your water supply. Talked about lead. I mean, I know we all heard about the Flint, Michigan, but 20% of the US have unsafe levels of lead. Lead's an extremely toxic substance that is known to have some sort of cancer-causing properties. We also have chromium-6, which is a runoff of specific factories. And again, be aware of that. These are some things that are being tested. Imagine everything that's out there, it's not being tested. What's really not talked about is all the pharmaceutical drugs that are in our water supply as well. Again, pharmaceutical drugs get detoxified by the body, and then they're either excreted via urine or through the stool. A lot of it's excreted through urine because many of them are water soluble. With that being said, they're such tiny molecules at this point because the body's already basically gone through the detoxification process with all the enzymes, and the body then cannot, or the water filtration process that the water is coming from is not advanced enough to take care of these drugs. So then you're consuming antibiotics, antidepressant, hormones, and painkillers all through your water. So if you aren't having a good water filtration system, you can expect yourself to be exposed to these different drug residues. And how about this? You can even be exposed through your water to chemicals from rocket fuel. So Alex is really going to touch on the food supply and the whole food additives and all of that in the month 2 section, when it's really centered around nutrition, or giving your body the nutrients that it needs to thrive and to heal. Here are just some common food additives that are allowed into our food supply. We have thickeners and stabilizers, modified starches, colorants, emulsifiers, just to name a few. Basically, how our food industry works, to summarize it, is that it's the exact opposite of how it works overseas in Europe. The food industry can add whatever they want to the food that you're consuming, and they don't have to test it until there's an issue that goes wrong, and then they have to backtrack and potentially figure out what it is to test it. In Europe, it's the exact opposite. Anything that's exposed to the population, they have to be tested first before they can be added. In my opinion, obviously, I think most people would agree that's how it should be. Why would the food industry be allowed to add things to the food that could potentially be harmful to the population without being evaluated? Isn't that common sense? But again, when the politicians and the corporations are constantly in bed with each other, it's a challenging one to overcome, because the politicians care about what? They care about getting reelected. Well, who's paying for all of the all of their campaigns to get reelected? Well, the corporations who want them to pass certain policies. So that's a different topic of conversation, but just keep in mind that's what's happening here as well. Here's just a quick graph about the amount of foods, amount of pesticides that have increased just since 1992 to 2013. It's exponential increase, and it's only going to get more. So here are the foods you should always avoid. Again, they call it the clean 15 and the dirty dozen, which can be found at ewg.org. And I recommend buying all produce organic, 100%. Not only talking about the exposure to pesticides, we're talking about the different practices that they have to use in the organic industry to keep their soil strong so they can have strong plants without using pesticides. If you're buying any sort of conventional produce, not only are you potentially, if not probably, getting exposed to many different toxins, you can also count that the soil from where the plant comes from is not very high, so you're naturally going to eat depleted food. The soil content that's in our food supply and that feeds our population is so depleted that we have to go above and beyond to even get what we need to thrive. So the next process is going to be, do we understand the routes that we eliminate toxins from our body? And are we doing proactive things to open up the organs of elimination, also known as the emunctory organs, so we can be excreting these toxins appropriately? That's what we do in month 1. If we're too toxic, our cells are not able to function appropriately, and then this leads, depending on your constitution, to chronic illness throughout your body. It's 100% guaranteed, if you're suffering chronic illness or you aren't optimizing yourself every single day, that somewhere in your body you're too toxic. So we have to open up these organs of elimination so that we can create the environment that we have to allow ourselves to decrease our toxic load, which inherently will allow our cells to function appropriately. So basically all these toxins that I'm talking about, they basically end up in the bloodstream, and then through that, they basically get processed through the main organ of detoxification, which is the liver. The liver does what's called phase 1 and phase 2. Basically, there's different enzymatic processes that happen that the liver takes these toxins and changes their molecules so that they aren't as toxic to the body and can be excreted. From there, they're excreted through these primary organs of elimination, which you already talked about, through the lungs, obviously through carbon dioxide. Other things are excreted through the lungs, the colon through stool, the skin through perspiration, and the kidneys through urination. Here's another idea of the primary organs of elimination, or again, the emunctory organs. If the primary organs of elimination are not functioning appropriately, then the body's not able to excrete toxins, and then the secondary organs of elimination have to kick on. I think about it that the secondary organs of elimination are all of the mucous membranes that are in the primary organs. So the mucous membranes that are on your sinuses, that are in your GI tract, that are in your bladder, for example, all of those then have to do the work of trying to excrete all of these toxins. Well, that's not their primary job. So what happens then? Then they get backed up, and then you experience pathological issues that lead to chronic illness and serious disease. What are some examples of this? The most common example that we always talk about is 90% of children that have eczema that use corticosteroids end up having asthma. Let's just use this as an example, and let's talk about it. Okay, so the body's trying to excrete toxins through the skin from a young child. How amazing is that? The body's always intelligently. It's trying to heal from the inside out. So it's knowing that if it's going to push out toxins, would it rather push out toxins through your lungs, through your kidneys, or through your skin? Well, your skin, if something happens to your skin's able to regenerate at a very high pace. And, if you have a rash on your skin or something on your skin, it's much less severe than having a huge or a large lesion in some other primary organ. So the body's intelligent. So it's pushing out toxins through the skin. Okay. What do we do as a culture? We suppress that by using corticosteroids for the eczema. Well, the body then, it's too toxic. It can't keep on trying to excrete toxins through one of the primary routes, and then you push that deeper. So toxins get pushed deeper, and the toxins end up where? Most commonly from the skin, they end up in the lung. The person develops asthma and has asthma the rest of their life. I blame the practitioners who are using corticosteroids for the treatment of eczema for children, because that's unsafe, and the statistics prove that. So that's just one example. What's another example that we do in our culture every single day? We use anti-perspiration deodorant. Our body's trying to excrete toxins again through our skin, and because we smell, because we haven't gotten to the root of the problem, we try and suppress that, and that drives the toxins deeper. We have seasonal allergies. So what do? We take an antihistamine, or we take a Zyrtec or Claritin D. So your body's trying to expel these toxins through the natural means of excretion, and then you suppress that by taking an antihistamine drug of some sort, and then your body has to do something with those toxins. So what does it do? It drives them deeper in the body, and the body has to then wall them off in some organ because it's not being excreted properly. So if you think about it like this, like a dam, right? Naturally, if this river wasn't dammed, this river would flow evenly, and if things happen through the process, meaning, someone spills gasoline from a man-made boat, or there ends up being a big storm that ends up debris within the waterway, because it's flowing properly, what happens? The river just takes away those toxins. Well, similar to what we do when we suppress the body's natural excretion, we suppress, meaning here's the dam, and the toxins build up over time and creates a burden on the body. The same thing happens with our bodies, and decreasing the ability for a body to excrete, the same thing transpires. So talked about what happens. We talked about the toxins. We talked about the exposure. And now we're going to talk about the solutions. I already gave you a handful of solutions to decrease your exposure to some of the environmental toxins, specifically in water and the air. Alex is really going to talk about in the month 2 to decrease the exposure in the food supply. But you can think about that in a rational way and wrap your head around it. Don't eat processed foods, eat natural, organic, whole foods. Bottom line. We're going to talk about more how to limit your exposure, and specifically with the food intolerance and what that does. And then 2, we're going to talk about how we open up these natural organs of excretion to allow ourselves to get to the point where we're supposed to be. So everybody has a food intolerance, as you already heard, and everybody has a food combination intolerance. If we're consistently eating our food intolerance, the body's not able to digest the food appropriately. And so then it putrefies and it ferments in our gut, and it creates a toxic environment that's absorbed in the bloodstream. So one of the most important things we can do to decrease our exposure to toxins is to decrease our food intolerance exposure and our food combination intolerance exposure. That in our clinical experience, that's the number one tool that someone can do to heal, because they're decreasing the exposure to such a high degree. Same with processed foods. Any sort of processed food that you're eating has some sort of food additives in there. So by decreasing your exposure to processed foods, to alcohol, to caffeine, all of these things that are still creating a toxic environment for our body, it's not allowing our body to heal appropriately. And the last step is the environmental toxins that I've already talked about in the slides today. Decreasing our exposure from in the air by getting some sort of filtration process, and making sure your filters for your air conditioning are ready to rock and roll, so on and so forth. By the water, by getting a good water filtration process for a whole house. If not, making sure you're buying a good one that you can use. And food, by eating organic, whole foods. Number 2, open up the emunctories, or the primary organs of elimination. We recommend, depending on the individual, detoxification routines to every single one of our patients. Why? Because incorporating some of these detoxification routines opens up the main organs of elimination, the emunctory organs, and allows your cells to drain toxins at a faster rate. So instead of holding on to these toxins while we're decreasing our exposure from the environment and our internal exposure through our food intolerance, we're also going to be opening up the channels of elimination through these detoxification routines that allow us and our cells to function appropriately. Some of these detoxification routines are what? Coffee enemas, castor oil packs, dry skin brushing, using cold water as a healing tool, which kind of goes into hydrotherapy. So I'm going to touch on that next. But all of these things are ways to move the toxins from the inside of our body to excrete them appropriately, faster to the outside. Hydrotherapy is the use of water in a therapeutic means. This has a wide array of things that we can do, but commonly the thing that we recommend that's the biggest bang for your buck is at least ending your shower in cold or only taking cold showers. That basically has a visceral reflection or reaction to the internal organs that allows a pumping action to take place to allow a healing property to happen. If you think about how we evolved, we were only bathing and swimming in bodies of water that were usually relatively cold. Rivers, oceans, lakes, all of that water temperature is cold. We didn't evolve to have a water heater in our water supply until what? The 1960s, 1950s. I don't know the exact date there, but so using cold water as a therapeutic means to heal is a primary and amazing opportunity for you to embark on every single day to bring healing into your life. Drainage remedies. This can be undas, it can be botanicals, it can be whole food supplements. There's different means that we'll recommend to you, depending on the person, to open up these organs or these channels of elimination to allow the body to heal faster. Movement. Movement is hypercritical for anybody who's trying to heal. If we don't move our body appropriately, our body does not have the capacity to drain these toxins effectively. The lymph and many of the blood vessels have to work against gravity, so there has to be a pumping action of sorts that only comes from movement. We aren't talking about exercise. Exercise is good to a certain degree, depending on who our patient is. Many people over-exercise, but moving your body every day and taking a priority, especially when you're at work or when you're in a seated position for a long period of time, to move your body is a necessary means to heal. And the last topic we'll talk about is suppression. So when the body's trying to excrete these toxins, suppressing that and not allowing the body to naturally do what it's supposed to do is one of the worst things that we can do. As I've said a few times already, because then the toxins are driven deeper into the body to more primary organs like the heart, lungs, kidneys, so on and so forth. So if the body's trying to express itself in some sort of way of excretion through diarrhea, for example, because you ate something the night before that your body didn't agree with, the last thing you want to take is an anti-diarrheal medication. Your body's naturally trying to excrete something it doesn't want inside it, and you're going to suppress that. That's not a good idea, and I would not recommend that. So being aware of these natural organs of elimination and using the detoxification routines that we touched on and more that we can recommend, that we will recommend as time progresses, to allow for the body to naturally excrete these toxins at a high rate. That's always the goal. It's always the objection, is to making sure that we know what routes of elimination are happening and taking place, and making sure that we are doing all of those appropriately so that our body can excrete these environmental toxins and the internal toxins that we create every single day at a high rate. I hope you find value in this, and I hope you can do some of the routines and things that we'll touch on to make sure that your organs of elimination or your emunctory organs are open for business. Thanks so much.